For decades, the close alliance between America and Europe has been taken for granted.
I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
Together we fought common enemies.
We're bound today by what bound us 40 years ago, the same loyalties, traditions, and beliefs.
Forged trading links worth billions of dollars.
Our economies are integrated, our cultures are integrated.
And tackled global challenges.
The Paris Agreement on climate change will take effect on November 4th.
But with Trump in the White House, the rhetoric has taken on a rather different tone.
The European Union was formed in order to screw the United States.
There's signs that Europe can no longer rely on its closest ally as the world gets ever more dangerous.
You didn't pay, you're delinquent. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You gotta pay.
It seems then an opportune time to explore the history of relations between America and Europe. And so in this first video, we'll reveal how an America that long preached isolationism came to be intimately involved in European affairs, and how, despite attempts to withdraw once again, the US found itself back in Europe permanently. Go back 200 years, and Trump's rhetoric
We have a thing called an ocean between us, right?
would not have been out of place. George Washington, in his parting letter to the American people, warns them not to get involved with foreign affairs, and calls Europe out in particular due to their frequent conflicts that have nothing to do with America. And, to be fair, for a good 100 years after he wrote that, Europe is indeed a little unstable, with war after war after war after war. But then we get to the 20th century, and try as it might, America would find it couldn't stay out of Europe any longer, and the events that would tie the fates of Europe and America ever closer together would begin with a war so big that even the Atlantic would no longer be a sufficient barrier. In 1914, the First World War erupts. America plans to once more sit this one out. President Woodrow Wilson argues the United States must be neutral in fact, as well as in name, and there is strong support for this policy among the American people. And yet America is a nation of immigrants, with up to a third of Americans tracing their ancestry back to Europe. And so individual Americans volunteer for humanitarian and military service. They cross into Canada to receive military training and are sent to Europe to fight under Allied flags. They serve as ambulance and truck drivers, as doctors and nurses, as pilots. They volunteer for the better good, to be with their friends, or to see the world. Other Americans donate money to the Allied war effort, while some American businessmen seize the opportunity to sell to the Allies while their country remains officially neutral. But for most Americans, the First World War is something that happens over there. In March and April 1915, this song climbs to #1 in the American music charts. It's the lament of a lonely mother whose son has been lost in the war.
10 million soldiers to the war have gone, who may never return again. 10 million mothers' hearts must break for the one who died in vain.
It captures the widespread American skepticism for the idea of joining European war. But events would gradually alter public opinion, and songs like these would soon give way to the drums of war. In May 1915, just a month after this song topped the charts, a passenger ship leaves New York bound for Britain. Commissioned by Cunard and built in Scotland, its first-class decks are world-renowned for their luxury, and it had been the recipient of the Blue Riband for the fastest Atlantic crossing a few years prior. Its name is Lusitania. Less than a week later, Lusitania is sunk by a German submarine, and its remains wash up on the beaches of Ireland. It's the victim of a policy of the German Empire called unrestricted submarine warfare, where German submarines attack merchant and civilian ships without the customary warning, with the goal of disrupting Britain's supply lines and forcing a surrender. The result in the case of Lusitania is the deaths of over 100 Americans. Such is the outrage in America that Germany pauses the tactic to avoid bringing the United States into the war. But less than 2 years later, frustrated with the stalemate on the Western Front, Germany resumes the policy once more, believing it can starve Britain out of the war before America can get its act together and intervene. But as more and more ships go down, and more Americans lose their lives, the US gears up for war. Meanwhile, a leaked telegram reveals Germany is trying to ally with Mexico, with American states set to be the spoils of war. The United States finally breaks with its long-held policy of isolationism and crosses the Atlantic. Thousands of miles from home, American soldiers relieve the tired Allies, boosting morale as they fight alongside the British and French for the first time. American resources replenish Allied stocks. American loans prop up ailing economies. And American sailors take the fight to the German submarines. In all, the United States mobilizes over 4 million personnel and tips the balance of war in favor of the Allies. And in November 1918, the armistice is signed. The guns fall silent. But this victory across the Atlantic comes at a price for America. Over 270,000 casualties, nearly 200,000 injured, nearly 70,000 killed. But an armistice is only an armistice, a truce essentially. Securing a lasting peace would take months of negotiations at the Palace of Versailles in France. President Wilson wants the United States to play a significant role in Europe's future. This is partly for moral reasons. He thinks America has a duty to promote democracy and international cooperation. And it's part strategic. He thinks American engagement is vital to prevent another massive war that the US could be dragged into once more. Key to his vision is the establishment of a League of Nations, an international organization that would help found a new world order based on democracy, with open diplomacy to settle disputes and security guarantees to deter aggressors before conflicts become wars. And with America playing its part, international relations would no longer be a playground of competing empires, but rather a community built on democracy and the rule of law. The result of negotiations is the Treaty of Versailles, and while it's much harsher on Germany than Wilson wants, the League of Nations does form a key part, and Wilson heads back to America with the treaty, which needs to be ratified by the Senate. It should be a formality. The Senate has never rejected a peace treaty. But Wilson would have a fight on his hands, with America's future role in Europe at stake. Back in the United States, Wilson battles to gain public approval for the treaty, and initially many Americans are receptive. But in the Senate, things soon begin to unravel. Longtime thorn in Wilson's side, Henry Cabot Lodge, is concerned that the treaty gives the League of Nations far too much power to determine American foreign policy, and so he leads a rebellion. Wilson, perhaps because his health is now failing, refuses to negotiate with the Senate. The Senate rejects the Treaty of Versailles, and the US would never join the League of Nations. As a result, while the League of Nations is still established, without America it will prove powerless to prevent what would later unfold. Wilson's European vision is reduced to a small US force helping to occupy the Rhineland, as per the terms of the treaty. Already, the American public is losing interest in Europe, and when elections come around again in 1920, the American people repudiate Wilson's legacy and pick the man fighting under a slogan that is all too familiar to us today.
All its unselfishness of nationality, if you will. I think it's an inspiration to patriotic devotion, to safeguard America first, to stabilize America first, to prosper America first, to think of America first, to exalt America first, to live for and revere America first.
Warren G. Harding campaigns and wins the presidency by promising that he will put America's interests above all others. Over the next few years, American troops in Europe would return home, with Harding focusing on the domestic front, where America is facing a post-war economic decline. One of the first problems to cross his desk concerns farming. American farmers had done well out of the First World War. With European agriculture disrupted, prices had soared and American exports to Europe had increased. But by the early 1920s, with European farming resuming, demand for American farm products declines and prices plummet. In 1921, Harding's administration imposes an emergency tariff, raising duties on most imported agricultural products. 1 year later, the Fordney-McCumber tariff raises the rates even higher. The result is a tariff war with Europe, with many nations increasing their tariffs in response. France, for example, raises its tariffs on American car imports to 100%. But there is another unintended consequence. Having loaned the Allies billions of dollars to help fund the war effort, America wants paying back. Problem is, the Allies don't have any cash, and these tariffs are only making it harder to export to America and thus earn dollars to service their debts. They should be getting at least some of this money from Germany, which has agreed to pay reparations to the Allies. But Germany can't afford them, and when it defaults on its payments, the French and Belgians occupy its industrial heartland, the Ruhr. Germany's government is now highly unstable. America fears a coup that would take away its ability to recover its money at all. And so in 1924, America steps in. It begins giving loans to Germany to help kickstart its broken economy, so that it can afford to pay the Allies, so the Allies can then afford to pay back the American loans. The man who comes up with this scheme, Charles G. Dawes, would win the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts. But its follow-up, the Young Plan, will be interrupted as events in America transform the continent of Europe once more. (1929) sees the Wall Street crash trigger the beginning of the Great Depression. President Herbert Hoover signs the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act to try and shield American industries. This provokes another tariff war with Europe, which deepens the Depression. The dire state of the American economy forces American banks to recall their loans to Europe, including those which are propping up the German economy, which collapses. In desperation, the Germans turn to more radical political leadership. Adolf Hitler. With Europe increasingly in the grip of fascism, America's instinct is to once more try and stay out of it. In fact, as Europe slides inexorably towards war, America passes a series of neutrality acts aiming to avoid being pulled in. But war is coming, and when it does, it will transform the transatlantic relationship to the present day. In 1939, the Second World War begins. And while a sizable chunk of the American population still clings on to isolationism, many can't help but be alarmed by the rapid military successes of Germany as nations across Europe fall under the Nazi jackboot.
Norway, Belgium, Holland.
And so what starts as a European war comes to be seen by some
France,
as a battle for the very future of democracy.
Yugoslavia, Greece.
President Roosevelt is in this camp. He doesn't think American participation can be avoided forever, but he faces an intricate balancing act, and so he keeps America neutral, but supports the Allies by selling or lending them war material through measures like cash and carry and lend-lease. And back home, he institutes America's first ever peacetime conscription and increases armament production. It gradually became a question of not if America would join the war, but when. And the question of when will be answered in December 1941.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor sees America enter the war, and 4 days later, Germany declares war on the United States. Now a major participant, American resources, manpower and technology soon make themselves felt both in the Pacific theatre and in Europe. On the home front, the American government spends $250 million per day. The result is the creation of millions of jobs, an industrial boom, and the end of the Great Depression. On May the 8th, 1945, the war in Europe ends in Allied victory. And after the American atomic bombings of Japan in August, the Second World War is over. So far, the 20th century had seen America, a country which had long preached isolationism, cross the Atlantic and play a decisive role in 2 world wars. And while it can be argued that its motivation was at least in part doing the right thing, such interventions were also a sign that in a world becoming ever more connected through globalization, America could no longer afford to sit on the sidelines. The Atlantic may well be a big, beautiful ocean, but it was not big enough to ensure America's security and prosperity independent of the fate of Europe. And with the end of the Second World War, it's fair to say the victory champagne soon loses its fizz. The world is about to split in two, as competing ideologies square off against one another. The result will be the Cold War, nearly half a century of tension, the closest we've ever come to total annihilation, and also the period where America is to become ever more invested in Europe's future for its own sake. And that is the subject of the next video.